The haul today is all fantasy and science fiction, and a little bit of 14th century poetry. Hello, my name's Gavin, this is Genre Books, and yesterday I found myself in Canterbury, so I ended up going around the bookshops. When you find a influx of books at a charity bookshop which are right up your street, and they all come together, you think someone's got rid of their collection, or someone's passed on, or gone to a home, aren't able to look after their book collection anymore. Usually this is just an abstract feeling, but when I found a section of books yesterday, which I got quite excited about, I noticed they were all bought by the same person. I know this because she's written her name in it and the year in which she's bought the book. At some point she's got married or otherwise changed her name, but has kept that tradition of dating the purchase, and she's also upgraded to an embossed seal. So I didn't want to split that collection up, but someone's already done that, so I tried to keep a little bit of it together. And that's these first half dozen books. And I'm starting with something I don't often see in a charity bookshop, and that is a Ballantine adult fantasy, and one which I didn't have, William Morris, The Water of the Wondrous Isles. If I didn't have a full slate, this would have qualified for Victober. These next two books are also in Ballantine, but I think he was the first in the Ballantine fantasy series after they had dropped that little logo. But Lynn Carter is still writing the introduction here, H. Warner Munn, Merlin's Ring. Now, I am going to be reading this in the next year because it was on my list of target books, because it involves Atlantis. And Atlantis is one of those mysterious lost lands I'm going to be paying special attention to. This came out in the mid-70s, but H. Warner Munn had been writing for some time. His first works, I think, were in Weird Tales in 1925, so the first year of that magazine's existence. So to be having your novels published 50 years later is an achievement. The sequel was also there, and by this point they've gone and got themselves a new logo. And within a year, that logo has changed again. The logo hasn't changed, but the title has. No longer Ballantine, they are now Del Rey Fantasies. This is Patricia Wrightson's The Ice is Coming, and we also see a change in cover art styles. This is by Michael Whelan, who has done many covers, probably most famously The Wheel of Time. I was in two minds whether to get this. I'm not familiar with the series, and the whole series, it looked like, wasn't there. The first book was, the third book was. I couldn't find the middle book for about 20 minutes. Then I did. So yes, I bought the whole lot. So The Ice is Coming, The Dark Bright Water, and Journey Behind the Wind. A science fiction collection now. Short stories from Brian Aldiss, comic Inferno, 1973, New English Library. A book which may be forming part of another little event I'm setting for myself is Sterling E. Lanier's The Unforsaken Hero. This is the sequel to Hero's Journey. It's not a name that appears on many fantasy lists, but it does appear on one that I've seen. The New English Library again, this time Clifford D. Simak, Project Pope. Pan science fiction, annoyingly covered in sticky back plastic, but there you go. Vertigo by Bob Shaw. Edgar Pangborn, West of the Sun. happy to grab this one as it continues. I don't know if it completes, but it certainly continues a series of which I've got the other two books, Davy and the Company of Glory. Mid-80s fantasy from Patricia A. McKillip, The Moon and the Face. This is a sequel to Moonflash, which I do have on my shelves. They also had a copy of Moonflash there, but it was in no better condition than the one I have. But I hadn't realised that that book had a sequel, so happy to pick this one up. But I also make a rod for my own back, because this series I found, and it didn't have the first book. I don't own the first book, and I'm now going to have to find the first book. But this series I was surprised to find, because I had been making my TBR for my upcoming science fiction project, and this was on the list. This is all about Atlantis again. I'm missing the first book in this series called The Serpent, but I did manage to get book number 2, The Dragon by Jane Gaskell, Atlan, book 3, The City, book 4, and, frustratingly, published by somebody completely different, book 5, Some Summer Lands. So, 4 books from Mrs. Gaskell, but, sorry Victober, not the Mrs. Gaskell you might have been thinking. Another pan science fiction, Brian Stableford, Halcyon Drift. Now I think, have a book from later in this series, so happy to pick up the first one in the series. And sometimes I do just want to take a bit of a gamble. I've done so with A Rose for Armageddon by Hilbert Schenck. Sphere science fiction, so not a mark of quality perhaps, but one of familiarity. The cover I like, and it's about 2 aging scientists troubled by visions of the approaching apocalypse. Why I'm attracted at the moment to books set against the rising tide of global chaos and anarchy, I've no idea. The winner of this haul's dullest cover, The Joymakers by James Gunn. So the back cover's not so much better. But yes, adds to my science fiction book club collection. And I did it again. A series missing the first volume. Some horror this time from Brian Lumley, but these covers just look great. Necroscope, The Lost Years. Necroscope 3, The Source. Necroscope 4, Deadspeak. And Necroscope 5, Dead Spawn. So, I'll have to find myself Necroscope, or Necroscope 1, whatever it calls itself. Those purchases were all unplanned, happy coincidence, serendipity. These ones, absolutely planned online purchases. I have the sequel to this book, so I got the first in the series, Deborah Turner Harris, Caledon of the Mists. So a fantasy set in an alternative Scotland. These next 2 books are fantasy. They're Bangsian fantasy, of which more next year, and written by a whole bunch of people. This first book is a collection. Well, it's not quite sure how this is put together, but it has works by Chris Morris, Gregory Benford, CJ Cherry, Nancy Asaya, David Drake, Janet Morris, and CJ Cherry and Janet Morris. Heroes in Hell from Baen Books from 1986. And I think this is the book that comes next, The Gates of Hell. We'll have to find out what the order of these, but this is CJ Cherry and Janet Morris. I had been after book 2 in this collection, because I've got 1 and 3 in the same imprint, and I wanted this one, and curse you, World of Books, for your bloody torn covers. But here we are, Swords Against Death by Fritz Leiber. I don't think I've read this next book. It's possible I have when I was a child. I certainly remember watching the television series. Chucky from John Wyndham, getting ready for the Winter of Wyndham. Possibly the strangest book I have in this hall Cave of the Ancients by T. Lobsang Rampa. So here's stories of lost societies, occult beliefs, and Tibet. On my list to read in January 2025, Dante's Inferno. I will also in 2025, God help me, be entering the world of Richard Shaver and talking about Lemuria. Here's some books around the subject. Lost Continents and the Hollow Earth. I Remember Lemuria and the Shaver Mystery. So this is from David Hatcher Childress and Richard Shaver. War Over Lemuria by Richard Toronto. So Richard Shaver, Ray Palmer and the Strangest Chapter of 1940s Science Fiction. And the sequel to that book, Shaverology by Richard Toronto. I am ridiculously excited about reading what might be some very strange books in the next year and a bit. Under the ground, up in the Himalayas, back in time. I think it's going to lead me to some very strange places. And I might, before the end of the month, be sharing my TBR for this insanity. But until then,